It's the job of a leader to inspire all of the people to have trust in him, not just some of the people, not just the people he likes, not just the people on his party or the people he wants.
Andrew Tate, a polarizing figure known for his controversial opinions, has recently launched a scathing attack on UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, holding him directly responsible for the escalating immigration crisis in Britain. Tate's criticism, though extreme in its tone, tapped into a wider public sentiment of dissatisfaction with the government's handling of immigration. His accusation, however, went beyond mere criticism of policy. He tied Starmer's leadership to the anti-immigration riots, blaming the Prime Minister for not addressing the root causes of the unrest in the first place. This public feud between a political figure and a social media personality has brought the issue of immigration to the forefront of national discourse, with the ensuing debates revealing deep divides within British society. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. Andrew Tate's commentary on Starmer's leadership comes at a time when the United Kingdom is grappling with a multifaceted immigration crisis. The country has seen a surge in asylum seekers and migrants arriving on its shores, largely due to global instability, conflicts, and economic disparities. These developments have not only strained public services, but have also sparked unrest in communities across the country. Anti-immigration protests, some of which have turned violent, are becoming increasingly frequent, creating an atmosphere of tension and division. Tate, never one to shy away from incendiary rhetoric, seized on these events to lay the blame squarely at Starmer's feet, accusing him of being ineffectual and out of touch with the concerns of ordinary Britons. Tate's argument hinges on the notion that Starmer has failed to take decisive action to stem the tide of immigration, instead offering what many critics describe as half-hearted measures that do little to address the underlying issues. In Tate's view, the Prime Minister's inability to enact meaningful reform has not only exacerbated the crisis, but also incited the very riots that now plague the streets. The anti-immigration protests, according to Tate, are not a spontaneous outburst of xenophobia, but rather a direct response to the government's inaction. He frames the unrest as the inevitable consequence of leadership failure, painting Starmer as a weak figure incapable of standing up to the political and social challenges posed by immigration. What makes Tate's attack particularly striking is its timing. Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, has been attempting to navigate a delicate political landscape, one where immigration is an increasingly contentious issue. With a rise in right-wing populism across Europe and a growing chorus of discontent among voters in the UK, Starmer has tried to position himself as a moderate who can offer pragmatic solutions to complex problems. However, his approach has often been criticized as too cautious, too slow, or too bureaucratic, leading to frustration among those who believe the government is not doing enough to protect national borders. Tate's vocal condemnation taps into this vein of frustration, resonating with a segment of the population that feels neglected by the current political establishment. Tate's ability to influence public opinion on such matters speaks to the broader cultural and political landscape in which his comments are being made. As a former kickboxing champion and now a social media influencer with millions of followers, Tate has cultivated a persona that thrives on controversy and confrontation. His opinions, while often provocative, are amplified by a digital platform that rewards sensationalism. In this case, Tate has turned his sights on Starmer, using the Prime Minister as a foil to promote a broader critique of the political system. By framing Starmer as the embodiment of governmental failure, Tate taps into a growing sentiment of distrust toward mainstream political leaders, a theme that has become increasingly prevalent in recent years. However, Tate's criticisms, while resonant with certain segments of the population, are not without their contradictions. His analysis of immigration and its impacts is simplistic, reducing a complex issue to a matter of poor leadership without considering the broader forces at play. Immigration is not merely a domestic policy issue. It is shaped by global events, international relations, and economic factors beyond the control of any single government. Starmer, despite his perceived failings, is operating within a system that is under immense pressure from these external forces. Furthermore, the solutions to the immigration crisis are not straightforward. Policymakers must balance humanitarian concerns with national security, economic realities with social cohesion, and domestic pressures with international obligations. Tate's critique, while forceful, overlooks these nuances, offering instead a black-and-white narrative that lays all blame at the feet of one man. Still, the impact of Tate's words cannot be dismissed. His attack on Starmer has energized a faction of the public that views immigration as an existential threat to the British way of life. For these individuals, the anti-immigration riots are not just a protest against migrants, but a broader rejection of a political class they see as out of touch and ineffective. Tate's commentary has given voice to these frustrations, galvanizing those who feel that their concerns are being ignored by the political establishment. In this sense, his critique serves as a rallying cry for those disillusioned by the status quo, pushing the immigration debate further into the realm of populist anger. What is particularly concerning about this situation is the potential for Tate's comments to further inflame tensions around immigration. By directly linking Starmer's leadership to the riots, Tate risks legitimizing violence as a form of political expression. The anti-immigration protests have already been marked by incidents of aggression and clashes with police, and Tate's rhetoric may inadvertently stoke these fires. His characterization of the riots as a justified response to government inaction could embolden more extreme elements within the anti-immigration movement, escalating the potential for further unrest. The power of language in such contexts cannot be underestimated, and Tate's choice to frame the issue in such stark, confrontational terms may have unintended consequences. Keir Starmer, for his part, has largely refrained from engaging directly with figures like Tate, preferring instead to focus on policy discussions and internal party politics. However, the intensity of Tate's attack may force Starmer to confront this criticism head-on, if only to quell the growing unrest among certain voter groups. The Prime Minister has attempted to present himself as a unifying figure, capable of bringing together disparate factions within the Labour Party and the country at large. But the immigration crisis, exacerbated by public figures like Tate, threatens to undermine this narrative. If Starmer is unable to articulate a clear and compelling solution to the immigration issue, he risks alienating both his base and the wider electorate. The broader implications of Tate's attack on Starmer extend beyond the immediate issue of immigration. It speaks to a deeper political divide in the UK, one that has been growing in recent years as populist movements gain traction across Europe and the West. At the heart of this divide is a sense of disillusionment with traditional political institutions and leaders, who are seen as disconnected from the everyday concerns of citizens. Tate's critique of Starmer taps into this sentiment, offering a populist critique that aligns with a wider movement of dissatisfaction and anger toward the political class. In this way, the immigration debate becomes a proxy for larger questions about leadership, governance, and national identity. Moreover, the prominence of figures like Tate in public discourse highlights the shifting nature of political influence in the digital age. Social media has given rise to a new breed of influencers who can shape public opinion in ways that traditional politicians cannot. Tate's platform allows him to bypass the conventional channels of political debate, reaching millions of followers directly and unfiltered. This shift in influence poses a challenge to traditional political leaders like Starmer, who must now contend not only with opposition parties and media scrutiny, but also with the powerful voices of digital influencers who command their own loyal audiences. The interplay between political leadership and social media influence is becoming an increasingly important dynamic in contemporary politics, one that can have significant implications for how policy is shaped and implemented. The escalating feud between Andrew Tate and Prime Minister Keir Starmer over immigration policies reflects a deeper societal anxiety, one that exposes profound tensions within British society. While Tate's harsh critique has resonated with a segment of the population disillusioned by governmental handling of immigration, it also taps into broader concerns about national identity, social cohesion, and the role of political leadership in an increasingly globalized world. Immigration has long been a contentious issue in the UK, but in recent years, it has become a flashpoint for far larger debates about sovereignty, multiculturalism, and the future direction of the country. Keir Starmer, whose leadership has been under constant scrutiny since assuming office, is no stranger to political attacks. However, Tate's public denunciation stands out not only for its intensity, but for its ability to galvanize public sentiment in an increasingly volatile political environment. Tate, with his significant following and provocative style, offers a critique that mirrors the anxieties of many British citizens who feel that their concerns about immigration are being ignored or minimized by the political elite. The criticism, however, goes beyond personal attacks on Starmer's competence as a leader. It calls into question the very structures and ideologies that underpin modern British governance. At the core of Tate's argument is the notion that immigration is a fundamental problem that must be addressed with urgency and conviction. His frustration mirrors that of a growing number of citizens who view the current immigration system as broken, inefficient, and detrimental to the country's welfare. For Tate and his supporters, the arrival of migrants is not merely a logistical issue of border control or resource allocation, but a threat to the very fabric of British society. They argue that unchecked immigration leads to cultural dilution, economic strain, and social unrest, issues that, in their view, have not been adequately addressed by the political class, including Starmer. The portrayal of immigration as an existential crisis is not new, but it has gained renewed traction in recent years, particularly in the wake of Brexit. The decision to leave the European Union was, in large part, driven by concerns over sovereignty and the ability to control national borders. For many, the promise of Brexit was not just about freeing Britain from the bureaucratic constraints of Brussels, but about reclaiming control over who enters and exits the country. However, in the years since the referendum, the immigration debate has intensified rather than dissipated. The challenges of managing asylum seekers, refugees, and economic migrants remain as pressing as ever, with no easy solutions in sight. Starmer, in his efforts to chart a moderate course on immigration, has found himself walking a political tightrope. On the one hand, he must appeal to progressive elements within his party and broader voter base who view immigration through the lens of humanitarianism and social justice. For these voters, the UK has a moral obligation to provide refuge to those fleeing war, persecution, and poverty. On the other hand, he must contend with a more conservative electorate that is increasingly concerned with national security, social cohesion, and the economic impact of immigration. Balancing these competing demands has proven difficult, and it is in this context that Tate's accusations gain their potency. Tate's critique, however, also plays into a larger narrative of populist discontent that has been sweeping across much of the Western world. From Donald Trump in the United States to Marine Le Pen in France, political leaders and influencers who frame immigration as a critical threat to national identity have gained considerable traction. They have successfully tapped into a sense of alienation and frustration among citizens who feel that globalization and multiculturalism have eroded the core values of their nations. In this sense, Tate's condemnation of Starmer is part of a broader trend in which populist figures position themselves as defenders of the common people against a detached and ineffectual political elite. This dynamic is further complicated by the economic realities facing many British citizens. The UK, like many other developed countries, has been grappling with economic stagnation, rising inequality, and a cost of living crisis that has only been exacerbated by global events such as the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine. In such a climate, immigration becomes a convenient scapegoat for broader systemic problems. Tate's argument that immigration is to blame for economic decline resonates with individuals who are struggling to make ends meet and who see migrants as competitors for scarce resources, from housing to jobs to healthcare. However, blaming immigration for these problems is a reductionist approach that overlooks the complexities of the economic and social systems at play. The UK's economic challenges are the result of a wide range of factors, including decades of neoliberal economic policies, technological change, and shifts in the global economy. While immigration can put pressure on public services, particularly in areas with high concentrations of new arrivals, it is also true that migrants contribute to the economy in significant ways. Many sectors, from healthcare to agriculture to hospitality, rely on migrant labor to function. Without these workers, the British economy would likely suffer even greater disruption. Tate's failure to engage with these nuances reflects a broader trend in populist discourse, where complex issues are often reduced to simple binaries: good versus bad, us versus them. In the case of immigration, this binary is often framed as a conflict between native citizens and foreign outsiders, with the latter being portrayed as a threat to the well-being and security of the former. This kind of rhetoric, while effective in mobilizing support, can have dangerous consequences. It fosters division and resentment, making it more difficult to find common ground and workable solutions to the challenges facing the country. The anti-immigration riots that Tate blames on Starmer are a case in point. These riots are not merely a reaction to immigration itself, but a symptom of deeper societal frustrations and anxieties. In communities that feel left behind by globalization, where economic opportunities are limited, and where public services are stretched to their limits, immigration can become a flashpoint for broader discontent. The riots, with their violent and destructive nature, reflect a breakdown in social cohesion and a growing sense of alienation among certain segments of the population. Tate's rhetoric, in linking these riots directly to Starmer's leadership, risks further inflaming these tensions. There is also a risk that by framing immigration in such stark terms, Tate and others like him contribute to a climate of fear and hostility toward migrants. The portrayal of migrants as an existential threat to British society not only dehumanizes them, but also obscures the real reasons why people seek to come to the UK. Many migrants are fleeing violence, persecution, and extreme poverty. Others are seeking better economic opportunities for themselves and their families. In most cases, they are motivated by the same desires that have historically driven migration across the world: the hope of a better life. The rise of anti-immigration sentiment, as articulated by figures like Tate, also raises questions about the future of multiculturalism in the UK. Britain has long prided itself on being a diverse and inclusive society, where people of different backgrounds can live and work together. However, the growing backlash against immigration suggests that this vision of society is under threat. If leaders like Starmer are unable to articulate a compelling vision of how immigration and diversity can coexist with national identity and social cohesion, there is a risk that the country will become more divided, with tensions between different groups becoming increasingly pronounced. Tate's critique of Starmer also reflects a deeper philosophical debate about the role of the state in managing immigration. On one side are those who believe that the state has a duty to protect its citizens by strictly controlling its borders and limiting the number of people who can enter the country. On the other side are those who argue that the state has a moral obligation to help those in need, particularly refugees and asylum seekers, even if this means accepting higher levels of immigration. Starmer, in his role as Prime Minister, has tried to navigate these competing demands, but his efforts have been hampered by a political landscape that is increasingly polarized. This polarization is not limited to immigration, but extends to broader questions of governance and leadership. Tate's attack on Starmer is as much an indictment of the current political system as it is a critique of immigration policy. For many people, particularly those who feel alienated from mainstream politics, figures like Starmer represent a political class that is disconnected from the realities of everyday life. Tate's appeal lies in his ability to speak directly to these individuals, bypassing the traditional political establishment and offering a more direct populist message. The implications of this dynamic are significant. As social media continues to play an increasingly important role in shaping public opinion, figures like Tate will likely become even more influential. Their ability to reach large audiences and mobilize support for their ideas poses a challenge to traditional political leaders, who must now contend with a new kind of political influencer. This shift in power dynamics could have profound implications for how political debates are conducted and how policy is formulated in the future. For Starmer, the challenge is not just to respond to Tate's criticisms, but to offer a vision of leadership that can unite a divided country. Immigration is one of many issues that will define his tenure as Prime Minister, but it is perhaps the most symbolic of the broader challenges he faces. The question is not just how to manage immigration, but how to lead a country that is grappling with profound changes in its social, economic, and political fabric. Starmer's response to this challenge will not only determine his political legacy, but also the future direction of the UK. The immigration crisis, which has become a key point of contention between Andrew Tate and Prime Minister Keir Starmer, encapsulates not just a national policy issue, but the deep-seated anxieties that permeate many aspects of British life. The tension surrounding immigration is not simply about the number of people entering the country, but about what it means to be British in the 21st century. This debate reflects a growing fear among some segments of society that the country they once knew is slipping away, replaced by something unfamiliar and, in their view, threatening. These fears are often heightened by economic instability, rapid technological changes, and global challenges that seem to elude traditional political solutions. For those who share Tate's view, the failure to control immigration represents a failure to protect the national character. The rapid influx of migrants, particularly from war-torn regions, is seen as an erosion of the cultural and social fabric that has long defined Britain. This perspective, while often expressed in simplistic terms, taps into a broader cultural unease about change in the future. Many who harbor these views feel that their concerns are being dismissed by the political establishment as intolerant or reactionary. Tate's voice, amplified by his large social media following, resonates with these individuals because he articulates their frustrations in a way that mainstream politicians, including Starmer, do not. But the immigration debate is more than just a question of national identity. It is also deeply entwined with the realities of global inequality and conflict. Many of the migrants seeking refuge in the UK are fleeing war, persecution, or economic despair in their home countries. While the media often focuses on the numbers, how many people are crossing the channel, how many asylum applications are being processed, there is less attention paid to the individual stories of those migrants and the desperate circumstances that drive them to leave everything behind. In this sense, the immigration crisis is a humanitarian issue, one that challenges not just the policies of the UK, but the moral conscience of the entire world. Keir Starmer's government has struggled to find a balance between the practicalities of managing immigration and the moral imperative to provide refuge for those in need. His critics, including Tate, accuse him of inaction or weakness, but the truth is that immigration policy is fraught with complexity. No solution is without significant trade-offs. A more open immigration policy might align with the UK's humanitarian values, but could also strain already stretched public services and increase tensions in communities where resources are limited. On the other hand, a more restrictive policy might appease some voters, but would leave the UK at odds with international human rights standards and its historical commitment to providing sanctuary for those fleeing persecution. The anti-immigration riots that Tate blames on Starmer are a symptom of these deeper tensions. They are not merely expressions of opposition to immigration, but signals of broader social discontent. Many of the people involved in these riots are likely driven by a sense of economic and cultural disenfranchisement. They live in communities that have seen little of the economic benefits promised by globalization and technological advancement. In these areas, where jobs are scarce and wages are stagnant, immigration becomes a convenient scapegoat for deeper systemic failures. However, the anger and resentment fueling these riots cannot solely be attributed to immigration itself. It is the intersection of multiple factors, economic insecurity, political distrust, and cultural anxiety, that creates the conditions for such unrest. The challenge for political leaders, particularly Starmer, is to address not only the immediate issue of immigration, but also the broader forces driving discontent. If these underlying issues are not addressed, the unrest will continue, regardless of what specific immigration policies are implemented. At the heart of the immigration debate is the question of control. For many of those opposed to current immigration levels, the issue is less about the individuals coming into the country and more about the perceived loss of control over the nation's borders. This sentiment was a key driver of the Brexit vote, where the slogan "Take Back Control" resonated deeply with voters who felt that decisions about immigration were being made by distant bureaucrats in Brussels rather than by the British government. Even after Brexit, however, the feeling persists that the government has failed to regain that control, with asylum seekers continuing to arrive in significant numbers. Tate's critique taps into this ongoing sense of powerlessness. He frames immigration as something that is being imposed on the British people, a crisis that has spiraled out of control due to the incompetence or unwillingness of the political class to take decisive action. This narrative, while compelling to many, overlooks the realities of modern migration, which is driven by forces far beyond the control of any one government. Wars, climate change, economic collapse. These are the kinds of global crises that create refugees and drive people to seek a better life in more stable countries like the UK. The idea that any leader, even one as capable as Starmer could simply solve immigration, ignores the complexity and scale of the challenge. That said, Starmer's leadership on immigration has been criticized not just by figures like Tate, but also by voices within his own party. There are those within the Labour Party who believe that he has been too cautious, that in his attempt to appeal to both the left and right of the political spectrum, he has failed to offer a bold and coherent vision on immigration. These critics argue that Starmer needs to take a stronger stand, either by embracing a more open immigration policy that aligns with progressive values, or by offering more concrete solutions to the concerns of those worried about immigration's impact on British society. By trying to do both, they argue, he risks pleasing no one. On the other hand, there are also those who see Starmer's approach as pragmatic, recognizing the need for a balanced policy that addresses both the humanitarian needs of migrants and the legitimate concerns of British citizens. These supporters point out that immigration is an issue that requires careful management and that there are no easy solutions. They argue that Starmer's caution reflects the complexities of the situation and that any attempts to radically shift policy would likely lead to unintended consequences. In this view, Starmer's critics, including Tate, are guilty of oversimplifying the problem in pursuit of political points. The media plays a significant role in shaping public perceptions of the immigration debate. Sensationalized coverage of migrant arrivals, particularly images of boats crossing the English Channel, can stoke fears and reinforce the narrative that the country is being invaded. This portrayal often overlooks the broader context of why these migrants are coming to the UK in the first place. Many of them are fleeing conditions that are unimaginable to most British citizens: war zones, oppressive regimes, extreme poverty. The journey they undertake is perilous, and many do not survive it. Yet the coverage often reduces their plight to a question of numbers and logistics, ignoring the human stories behind the headlines. The rise of social media has only amplified this dynamic. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube allow figures like Tate to bypass traditional media and speak directly to their audience. This has given rise to a new kind of political discourse, one that is often more extreme and polarized than what is found in mainstream outlets. Tate's attack on Starmer is a perfect example of this trend. His message, delivered in bite-sized, attention-grabbing sound bites, is tailor-made for the social media age. It spreads quickly, resonating with those already predisposed to agree with him while stoking outrage among those who do not. In this environment, nuance and complexity are often lost. This new media landscape presents a challenge for political leaders like Starmer, who must find ways to communicate their policies and ideas in a way that can compete with the simplicity and immediacy of populist rhetoric. It is no longer enough to present detailed policy papers or deliver thoughtful speeches. Leaders must also be able to engage with the fast-paced, often hostile world of social media, where their every move is scrutinized and critiqued in real time. This shift in the nature of political communication is one of the defining features of contemporary politics, and it has profound implications for how debates like the one over immigration are conducted. Tate's criticism of Starmer, therefore, must be understood not just in terms of the content of his message, but in the context of how that message is delivered and received. Tate's power lies not in his political expertise, but in his ability to connect with a disaffected audience that feels alienated from the political process. He offers them a sense of belonging, a sense that their frustrations are being heard and validated, even if the solutions he offers are simplistic or unrealistic. In this sense, Tate is less a political commentator and more a cultural figure, someone who embodies the anger and disillusionment of a particular segment of society. For Starmer, the challenge is not just to rebut Tate's specific criticisms, but to offer a broader vision that speaks to the concerns of those who feel left behind. This means not only addressing immigration policy, but also tackling the deeper issues of economic inequality, social division, and political disenfranchisement that are driving the anger behind the anti-immigration riots. Starmer must find a way to bridge the gap between the progressive ideals of his party and the more conservative instincts of many of the voters he needs to win over. This is no easy task, but it is one that will define his leadership in the years to come. One of the key issues complicating the immigration debate is the question of integration. For those opposed to current immigration levels, the fear is not just that migrants will take jobs or strain public services, but that they will fail to integrate into British society. There is a concern that large-scale immigration, particularly from countries with different cultural and religious traditions, could lead to the formation of isolated communities that do not share the values of the broader population. This fear, while often overstated, is not entirely unfounded. Integration is a complex and challenging process that requires both migrants and the host society to make adjustments. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what's your opinion on Andrew Tate's criticism of Keir Starmer's leadership? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.